What if I told you that a 2,700-year-old story, yeah, about trading crops, actually holds the key to understanding modern power plays? We're going to dive way back to 716 BC to unpack this brilliant hidden insult that was honestly a masterclass in challenging authority. Okay, think about it. Sometimes the most innocent-looking request, a friendly favor, can actually be a declaration of war in disguise. And that is exactly what we're looking at here, in this ancient story about two leaders and what seems like a simple exchange of grain.
All right, let's set the stage. We really need to understand the players here, because this wasn't just any proposal. No, this was a super high stakes move between a king whose power was, let's say, fading, and a duke who was more than ready to take it.
So picture this. We're in ancient China during the Zhou dynasty. And the thing is, the king's power, it's starting to crumble. All these regional lords, these vassal states, they're getting stronger, especially this one duke from the state of Zheng. And between the king and this duke, well, there's this really tense Cold War brewing. The whole balance of power is on a knife's edge. So who are these two men at the center of this whole political chessboard? I mean, understanding them is the key to unlocking this entire drama. Okay, so on one side, you've got the Zhou King Huan. A good way to think of him is like a CEO of a legacy company that's kind of floundering. He's trying to save face. His authority is mostly symbolic at this point, pretty weak. And then on the other side, you've got the Duke of Zhuang. This guy is a top player. He's ambitious, strategic, and he is absolutely ready to test just how weak the king really is. And this is what brings us to the proposal itself. Now, on the surface, it sounds completely reasonable, just a neighborly exchange. But underneath, oh, it is packed with hidden aggression. It's basically political poison.
So the duke's proposal sounds simple enough, right? Hey, let's do a friendly crop swap. It'll help us both out. It's all framed as mutual aid. But you have to read between the lines here. This wasn't a favor. It was a challenge, just wrapped up in the language of courtesy.
So you might be thinking, it's just a trade, what's the big deal? Maybe even sounds like a good idea. Wrong. This was a brilliantly calculated political move, and I'm going to tell you exactly why it was such a profound, deep insult. Okay, so this was this masterful three-pronged attack, all hidden in one simple request. First, it completely shattered the hierarchy. By suggesting an equal trade, the Duke basically forced the divine king to act like a common merchant, just dragged him right down to his level. Second, it desecrated the sacred. The king's grain was meant for holy rituals, not for bartering. Trading it just made it common. And third, and this is so clever, it was a probe. It was a brilliant way to test if the king even had control over his own core resources anymore. See, you have to understand, the king's grain had this incredible brand value. It wasn't just food, right? It was a rare, sacred symbol of his divine right to rule over absolutely everyone, and that includes the duke. And this, right here, perfectly illustrates the duke's real goal: to strip away all of that sacred, exclusive value. He wanted to turn the king's ultimate symbol of power into just a simple commodity, something common, interchangeable, and absolutely no more special than his own grain. So what happened? Well, the king, feeling weak and probably seeing no way out, he agreed to the trade. And just like that, his authority was shattered. The duke's gambit worked perfectly. And his strategy gives us this timeless playbook for understanding how power really works, even today. Yeah, the duke's strategy is amazing because it reveals these three timeless lessons about power that are just as relevant in a modern office as they were back in an ancient court. All right, lesson 1. Beware the low-cost test. Think about it. The Duke didn't risk an open war. That would have been too costly. Instead, he used this low-stakes, seemingly reasonable request to gather critical intelligence. The goal wasn't really the grain itself. It was to see how the king would react, to test his boundaries. And the lesson for us is, if you give in on a small test like this, you're basically inviting a much bigger challenge later on. Okay, lesson 2. You have to protect your scarcity. What makes you unique, your sacred grain, so to speak, that's the real source of your power. The moment the king's grain became just another crop, it lost all its leverage. It's kind of like in business, right? When a luxury brand is constantly running discount sales, it devalues the very thing that makes it special. Once you let yourself become a commodity, you lose your power. You lose the right to set the rules. And lesson number 3, learn to spot soft aggression. The Duke's request was so clever because it was framed as something reasonable. This made it really hard for the king to say no without looking petty or unreasonable himself. And this kind of attack, the one disguised as a favor, is often the hardest to defend against. That's why recognizing it and holding firm to established boundaries right from the start is your absolute best defense.
So, the real key takeaway from this entire ancient drama is this. You have to always look beyond the surface of any request. You've got to understand the underlying power dynamics that are really at play. You see, the Duke's ultimate victory wasn't getting some grain. No way. It was psychological. He managed to de-sanctify the king's authority. He tore down that sacred symbol, and in doing so, he paved the way for his victory in the real war that came later.
And that's the question this 2,700-year-old story really leaves us with. The next time you get a small, seemingly harmless request, maybe at work or just in your life, I want you to ask yourself, is this just a simple trade, or is it a test? Because learning to spot the difference, well, that changes everything.